So once we find out what we have, what risks and what assets we have, we're going to do the risk assignments. So a few things we can do with risk. We can do risk avoidance. All right. When we do risk avoidance, that involves identifying a risk and making the decision to no longer engage in the actions associated with that risk. So I know if I do this and there's this much risk, I might stop doing this. So now I have no risk. Why do something if I can't stop it? If there's no other way to deal with the risk, I'll just avoid it altogether. I know I have this system. It's constantly being under attack. I can't service my customers. It's under a DOS attack all the time. There's no controls I can put in place, so I'm just going to avoid. I'm going to unplug it. Now, sometimes that's not feasible, right? If you run cloud services, or if you run, services for hundreds or thousands of customers, you can't just avoid the risk. You can't just unplug your services. I guess you can, but you're going to go out of business rather quickly. So that may not be the best method for you. Maybe something like risk transference would be a little bit better. Now, that doesn't mean we take all the risk and we transfer it off onto somebody else, but here, take care of my problems for me. This is more of like sharing the burden with somebody else. Like, think about insurance, right? That's transferring some of the risk to someone else. So you're not responsible for everything. If you have homeowners insurance and something happens to your home, yes, you are responsible for part of that, but the insurance company is accepting some of that risk. That's why some of the riskier things cost more money, because the likelihood of it happening is more than, say, something happening to your house. Life insurance, if you jump out of airplanes, or you're an astronaut, or things like that, things that carry high risks, you may have a harder time getting life insurance, or you're going to pay more for it because you do riskier things. The likelihood of something happening is a little bit more. So you'll transfer some of that risk off. You can mitigate the risk. We always take steps to reduce the risk. We're mitigating what's going on. So if you drive a car and the risk is high of you having a wreck, mitigating that risk, you could drive slower. All right, you could learn how to drive better. May take a different road. So you mitigating that risk. That could be kind of avoiding the risk if the road is the risk, right? But we're putting steps to reduce the risk. That's mitigation. We could do risk deterrence. Now, this one is not as popular, but this is knowing something about the threat, the enemy, and letting them know that if you do something to us, if you do something to my systems, we might do something right back. Not the best idea. Risk deterrence is usually like a banner. You log in, right? This belongs to certain individuals or certain corporations. Anything done to this could be constituted as an attack, and we may take legal action. So, we're not saying we're going to hack you back. It's just saying there could be legal repercussions. We could also just do risk acceptance. Like, fine, I got it, not a problem. We usually do this like if the cost of putting like a mitigation control in there, or any of the other ones we talked about, exceeds the value of harm that would occur if the risk actually happened, if it came to fruition. So we could just accept it. We'd be like, well, we have a server. It keeps getting attacked. Every time it goes down, it costs $1,000, and it goes down 4 times a year. So there's $4,000. But I can put a firewall in place and stop that 50% of the time, but the firewall costs $10,000. So is that investment going to be worth just accepting losing $10,000 every time, or $2,000 every time, excuse me? Probably not. Most people won't pay $10,000 to protect $2,000. So they'll just be like, all right, we'll just accept that risk. That's fine. It's not a problem. We know what's going to happen. But again, putting something in place is going to be more of a burden, costs more. It's not going to work. And so we'll just accept the risk. So when it comes to acceptance of the risk, who is going to be assigned this risk for risk assignment and risk acceptance? Well, earlier we said that CEOs, right, the C-level folks are the ones that are ultimately responsible for risk, right? They're going to be ultimately responsible for the organization, for how things have happened, what has happened. But again, they get that information from you as the security professional. So not only does it affect them and affect the company, the organization, it's going to have a trickle-down effect. So the company may be assigned the risk, but it could be individuals that are also assigned the risk. It depends on your organization. It depends on what type of organization you have. Now, we do have some countermeasures we can put in place, like accountability, right? Who can be held responsible? That would be a countermeasure that we can put in place. Ease of use, automation, sustainable, secure. All these, right, are countermeasures. Countermeasures also protect confidentiality, integrity, and the availability of our assets. Hopefully, countermeasures can be backed out in the event of an issue. Sometimes, I've seen this happen probably more than once, but you'll apply a patch. That a patch doesn't play well with some proprietary software. So you have to back that out, back that patch off that operating system and figure something else out. Countermeasures need to be consistently applied, like our patches. They need to be cost effective. They need to be reliable. They need to come from a trusted source, meaning we know who that source is, right? If it's a countermeasure, let's say it's a new driver, and we need an updated driver for this piece of hardware. Get the driver from the original vendor, from a trusted source. Don't just find somewhere on the web to download drivers when it may not be the right driver exactly. Countermeasures need to be independent from other countermeasures where we don't have any overlap. That means, well, we got a countermeasure, but in order for that to work most effectively, you need to get this other one, and then maybe this other one, and then maybe this other one. It's just going to lead to more and more problems. So they need to be independent of each other. We don't want them to create additional issues during operation. Countermeasures are put in place to help us. We don't want them causing more issues, more problems, where we as professionals, IT professionals, have to go in and fix more problems. We're under enough pressure as it is. We don't want it to leave any residual data from its function. Again, we don't want it to cause more problems. We don't need more data. We don't need more stuff, if you will, to cause us more headaches. So those are all key items when it comes to countermeasures. Needs to have accountability, auditability, come from a trusted source and independent, cost-effective and reliable, secure, sustainable, automated, be easy to use. Again, protect the CIA triad, right? Those pillars of security that we build everything off of. Don't let them create any more issues, and let them know or make sure that it can be backed out in case there is a problem. So when we talk about countermeasures, we had lots of criteria to meet, but when it comes to implementation, there's some questions we need to ask ourselves, like who, what, why, when, where, how, what budget? So we have the latest and greatest countermeasure, the control we're going to put in place. Now it's time to implement this control so we can mitigate the risk. But who is going to be responsible for that? Probably you as a security professional, or you're going to work with a network admin, sysadmin, some other IT professional to get that control in place, to implement that control, to mitigate that risk. And I guess I'm assuming a technical control here, and it doesn't necessarily have to be technical. It could be a policy, some type of administrative control. So who would write the policy? Who's going to implement that policy? What are they going to implement? Well, that's the countermeasure or the control we're going to put in place. What is it that they're putting in place? Why are they putting it in place? Is it the right fit? You could jump down to budget real quick and say, well, why are they getting this when this would work too, and this costs 25% less? And they do the exact same thing. And this is good quality, that's good quality. Goes to the separation of duties, right? Who says this is what we need and who's responsible for buying it? We want those to be separate. So we have that security governance. See how this is kind of fitting together now? When are they going to implement it? Are they going to test it first? And that goes back to the who when I say they. So when are they going to do this implementation of this countermeasure? I guess it would kind of depend on the criticality of the risk. Well, we keep getting downtime over here. So we need this like yesterday. We need it right now. So the who is going to have to do the what right then. And where? Where are you going to implement this? Is this a organizational-wide policy? Is it a specific security policy? Is it a user policy? Is it an IT policy? Is it a network firewall? Is it a host-based firewall? Different things we have to think about. How are we going to implement it? Goes back to the when, kind of. Those two would go together. How are we going to implement this? Are we going to do it at night when nobody's in the office? Are we doing it on the weekend? If it says we have to do it right now, how are we going to do that and keep everybody in production? And then do we have the budget for this implementation? That goes back to our risk analysis as well, right? Quantitative versus qualitative analysis. Is it going to be worth it putting this control in place? This costs so much money. Our ALE, annual loss expectancy, is this much money. Is that cost effective for the organization? So do we have the budget? Do we have the financial support to implement this countermeasure? So all questions we have to ask ourselves when it comes to this implementation of controls. Now, I keep talking about controls, and there are some different ones that you need to be familiar with as a CISSP. First one we'll talk about is preventative controls. Now, these are deployed to stop unwanted or unauthorized activities from occurring because we're trying to prevent you, right? I'm trying to stop you, like fences, locks, biometrics, man traps, job rotation, data classification, separation of duties, access controls. Encryption is a very good preventative access control. I'm stopping you from seeing my data. Closed circuit television, callback procedures, security awareness training, antivirus, intrusion prevention systems, firewalls. These are all preventative systems. We have detective access control. This is deployed to discover unwanted or unauthorized activity. Now, detective controls operate after the fact, right? We can try to stop you from ever occurring, but now something has occurred. You got past our preventative controls. We stopped you though. We got rid of the threat. We patched the vulnerability. Now we're going to go back to our detective access controls and to see how. So they operate after the fact and discover the activity after it's been occurred. So detective access controls, motion detectors, recording, logs, closed circuit television, audit trails, honeypots and honey nets. Very popular when it comes to detective because that's what they're designed for. Intrusion detection system and intrusion prevention system, supervision and reviews of users, incident investigations, all ways we can go back after the fact and get information about what has happened. We can have a corrective access control. This modifies the environment to return systems to normal after an unwanted or unauthorized activity has occurred. So what they do is attempt to correct any problems that have occurred as a result of that security incident that's taken place inside your organization. So they can terminate malicious activity. They could reboot a system, for example. So they're doing something. They're not just trying to stop you. They're not just looking to see what's done, has happened. This is happening right now, and I'm trying to stop this action from occurring. It could be antivirus solutions, right? We have antivirus, host-based antivirus on your computer. A virus gets in or malware comes in. Corrective access control, like your antivirus, tries to kill or sanitize that virus that you may be getting or downloaded accidentally. Backup and restore plans need to be in place to ensure that lost data can be restored. We can also have active intrusion detection systems, which the ones that make changes are the intrusion prevention systems. Those could be corrective access controls. We have an intrusion prevention system on the perimeter. It sees an influx of SYN packets coming in. It may detect that that's a SYN flood, right? Somebody's trying to DOS our network. So it may push it off to a protected VLAN, taking corrective access control. We could have deterrent access control. This is deployed to discourage violations of security policies, like those banners I was talking about earlier. Now, deterrent and preventive controls, they're similar, but deterrent controls often depend on individuals deciding not to take the action. So I can put, say, a fence or a lock or a banner on the login screen of a computer, security cameras. Those are all deterrents, but it's not really going to stop anybody. If they want to go over that fence, they're going to figure out a way. They can go through it. Security cameras, they can walk right past it and wave. Right? It's not, a security camera is not going to prevent them. It won't jump down off the ceiling and tell them to stop. That's deterrence, not preventative care. Locks. You know, my parents, growing up all the time, they said locks only keep out the honest people. And I guess if you really think about it, that's true. Because your door lock, it does keep out the honest people. If somebody wants to get in, they're going to figure out a way. They'll bust the door down, come through the window, whatever. So those are deterrents. You could also have directive access control. This is deployed to direct, confine, or control the actions of subjects to force or encourage compliance with security policies. So examples of directive access controls include security policy requirements or criteria, post-it notification, escape route exit signs, monitoring, supervision, and different procedures that we have in place inside of our organization. We could have recovery access control. Now, this is deployed to repair or restore resources, functions, and capabilities after a violation of security policies. So recovery controls are an extension of those corrective controls, but these have a more advanced or complex abilities than those corrective controls. So these could be backups and restores, fault-tolerant drive systems, system imaging, like those snapshots that we can do with virtual machines, server clustering, antivirus software. Virtual machine shadowing could also be a recovery access control. And then we also have compensation access control. This guy is deployed to provide various options to other existing controls to aid in the enforcement and support of security policies. Now, they can be any controls used in addition to or in place of another control. Some of those controls we already talked about. So, for example, an organizational policy may dictate that all PII must be encrypted. Now, a review discovers that a preventative control is encrypting the data. Awesome. But the PII transferred over the network is sent in clear text. So we were doing what the policy said, right? We're storing it on our file server. PII is encrypted. Outstanding. But if I've got to transfer it from one server to another, now it's in plain text. So we would put this compensation access control to protect the data in transit compared to protecting it at data at rest. So how are these controls applied? We talked about the types of them. How can they be applied? Well, we have administrative controls. These are policies and procedures defined by an organization's security policy and other regulations, local, federal, state regulations, or requirements. These could be also considered management controls. So administrative controls, management controls, kind of synonymous. Now, these could be policies, procedures, hiring practices, background checks, data classifications and labeling, security awareness training, and efforts like that. Vacation history, work supervision, personnel controls, and testing. We can have logical and technical controls. You may hear them called technical access controls. So these are the hardware and software mechanisms used to manage access and provide protection for resources and systems. So authentication methods could be a technical control. Firewalls, protocols, routers, IDSs, IPSs. A lot of these things I've mentioned already. So those are all logical, or you're probably going to hear them called technical controls. We also have physical controls, items you can physically touch. Now, these are physical mechanisms deployed to prevent, monitor, or detect direct contacts with systems or areas within a facility. And we've talked about some of these already, being some of those preventative measures or deterrent measures. Motion detectors, locked doors, sealed windows, lights, cable protection, laptop locks, badges, video cameras, man traps, guard dogs. All those are physical controls because we can touch them, right? Not necessarily technical, where they're laying on the IT side of it, if you want to look at it that way, like the firewalls and IDSs. I know we can touch those, but these are items that prevent, monitor, or detect direct contacts with systems and areas within the facility. Then we have something called control assessment. This is verifying that the implementers, the people that are taking our controls and doing something, they're implementing, and the operators of information systems are meeting their stated security goals and objectives. Are we doing what we said we were going to do? Now, these findings are used to determine the overall effectiveness of the security controls associated with an information system, and to provide credible and meaningful inputs to the organization's risk management process. So this assessment, we're going to go in and say, well, this was the risk. This is what we said our assets were worth. These are the countermeasures that we're going to implement. But how effective are they? We're going to look at these controls and see and assess how well things are going. So we're going to determine the overall effectiveness. So how can we measure if those controls are actually working? How do we know those controls are working? Well, a couple things we can do for technical controls would be like vulnerability scans or penetration testing. We know a vulnerability scan is when we scan the network and we're looking for weaknesses. We're looking for ways to get in that network. But if we take it one step further, that's a penetration test. So I find a weakness. Now I'm probing or I'm penetrating your network. I'm actually going through that weakness, that vulnerability, and maybe trying to perform a DOS attack to see how well that control is in place, to see if your firewall or your IDS or your IPS is going to deter me or prevent me. We can also do audits for, say, administrative controls or managerial controls, like our policies and our procedures, right? We could try to tailgate somebody in the door. I think I mentioned that one in an earlier section. I could call somebody on the phone, act like I'm tech support, and see if they would divulge their username and password for me. They should be following those administrative policies about not giving out information over the phone. This is a way to test that. Could be part of a penetration test. A little bit about asset valuation. We've talked about our assets, but two key terms we need to be familiar with when it comes to our assets, and that's tangible assets and intangible assets. Tangible assets are something we can touch. We can put our hands on it, right? I can pick it up and say, this is tangible, right? Like hardware, facilities, customer lists, intellectual properties. Those are all tangible assets. Now, intangible assets, they're unable to be touched, like employee morale, reputation, brand, customer satisfaction, right? The way we're perceived, your reputation. So intangible is your morale, reputation. Tangible, we can touch, we can see it, we can put a dollar value on it, if you will. And then reporting. Reporting our risk analysis needs to go up the chain as high as it can go. Now, we talked about that earlier. You know, if we are down here and we're a security professional, but maybe we're just a security analyst, and we have a couple layers of management above us before we get to some of those C-level guys, like the CIO, or maybe the IT director. Maybe you don't even have a CIO. Well, if we have to jump through 14 hoops to get to the one that we think it needs to go to, it may not get to the correct spot. So we need to make sure that we express this risk analysis the best we can, and that they are expecting this. Because remember, ultimately, they're going to be responsible for the risk in the company. They need to make sure they get all the information they can to make informed and reliable decisions. Now, depending on the report audience, all right, the ISO needs to understand terminology, and they also need to understand how to explain technical topics in everyday terms. And I think I've mentioned this a couple times. Because in your risk analysis report, you may have an IT director you report to, but you may also say give it to the board, because they're going to have to decide where to spend money to put things in place to protect the organization. Well, the board, again, may not be super technical folks. They understand the business processes and have a global view of how things are in the business. You're there for a specific reason because you are a security professional and you are more technical. So that report for the board may not be as technical. And if you do have to put technical terms, maybe a glossary of some sorts explaining what those technical terms mean. But if you have to give it to an IT director or some type of IT lead, you may make that more technical, because more than likely they're going to understand that terminology. They're going to understand what you mean. So instead of writing out annualized rate of occurrence or annualized loss expectancy, like you might in a board's report, you may just put the acronyms, because the technical person may understand that a little bit better. Now, when it comes to risk and when it comes to your organization, we want continuous improvement. And again, I went on the web and looked for images to help convey this a little bit better. And there are hundreds of them out there. And I found one that I just thought looked pretty nice. But you may see something called the PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act. It's also known as the Deming cycle, where we plan something, we do it, we check it, and then we act upon it. So the plan, establish the objectives, plan the processes. The do, we're going to implement those processes, execute them. Check, we're going to study the actual results, compare them against expected results to see if it's doing what it is we thought it was going to be doing. And then we can act. We can take any corrective actions, analyze the differences. So we had a plan, we did them, we checked them to see if they were doing what they were supposed to. If they are, great. If they're not, we need to act again. And then we can start the cycle all over again, because we have continuous improvement. Just like earlier when we said The business is always evolving, improving, getting better, selling more products, becoming more productive. This is what we're talking about, continuous improvement. We do this in our everyday lives, right? We want a better job. We want better health. We want better this, better that. And hopefully we're trying to improve upon it all the time. We want to be smarter in IT. You want to improve, you're taking a CISSP course. How could that not be improvement? So it's always continuous improvement in our skills, in our life cycle, in our lifestyle, in our businesses, in our risk analysis, in our security governance. We're always doing this continuous improvement. And then the risk frameworks. Now, the policy objectives, they mandate and have commitment to manage risks. So that's kind of what a framework does. It's the way things are done, right? And there are literally dozens of these out there. We talked about frameworks a little bit earlier and finding one that fits your organization. So the organizational arrangements include plans, relationships, accountabilities, resources and processes and activities, and should be embedded within the organization's overall strategic and operational practices and policies. So that framework needs to meet our business outline as well. And that's what I was talking about earlier. When we're going to pick the framework we want to use, our organization needs to fit it as closely as possible. Now, we could have a security program framework. So the organization's security program should be tailored to specific needs of the business. Now, we need to take into consideration, again, the overall mission, like we said, the business objectives, operating climate, and any strategic and technical plans that they may have for the organization. Now, there's many frameworks, like I said, for us to follow. A couple of them I listed here. The ISO 27002, the Code of Practice for Information Security Management. Now, this is an international standard jointly issued by the ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, and the International Electrotechnical Commission. And what this does is provides the best practices framework for implementing and managing an information security program. So it's a good outline, best practices framework. Very good place to start. If you've never looked at a security framework, you could look this one up. And this would be a very good place to start for you to start learning and looking and seeing how these frameworks are laid out. Now, we also have the 27001. This is a little bit more detailed implementation of guidance for the security practitioner, you, and defines the requirements for formal specification of an information security management system that can be independently certified. So, in other words, this is more of a standard compared to the 27002 guideline. The other one was kind of just like a best practices guideline. This is more of a standard of how things need to be done. Now, coming up next, we're going to wrap up Domain 1, starting with threat modeling.